Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events. It is in full use right now, or full swing, I should say, thanks to the Contender series, which gives you guys an opportunity to research and study these guys before they step foot in the cage every Tuesday night, so you know what to expect and who is most likely to earn a contract after the show is set and done. We have direct links to past fights for all of these fighters coming up, not just the Contender series, but 17 promotions from all over the world. We've just recently eclipsed 4,100 fighter profiles. Make sure you guys check it out for free with a 7-day free trial. Link in the description below. Check out what all the hoopla is about. All right. We got PFL 8 going down this weekend. It is the playoffs, I believe, for the let me just quickly pull it up here. The light heavyweight division as well as the lightweight division. So we got we got 4 total playoff matches as well as a bunch of other fights sprinkled out throughout the card. I was trying to get this out for Wednesday. I didn't finish studying the card until about 9 p.m. So I was a little bit too tired to actually hit record at that point in time. But I was able to, I made sure one of the first things I did this morning waking up was to record this and get this out for you guys ASAP. So appreciate all the patience and the love, the support. Appreciate you guys always checking out the podcast. Reminder, UFC 305 content has been dropping on a daily basis, so make sure you guys check out the YouTube channel to see where my head is at for all that. And ACA is also going down Friday morning. I'll have written breakdowns for that on the MMALOTN Lock of the Night Patreon. Link for that is in the description below if you want to get some early Friday action before PFL kicks off in the evening and before the UFC card on Saturday. All right. Without further ado, let's get into the breakdowns for, I believe, this 10-fight PFL card. Again, I don't normally go as in-depth and detailed as I normally go with my UFC breakdowns for these PFL cards, but I'll try to get to the point as soon as possible. But this is a chalk-heavy card. This is not a good card for betting, in my opinion. Not a whole lot of value. A lot of the meat already chewed off the bone for a lot of people smashing the openers. Few spots I feel good about with decent enough odds, but for the most part, this is a chalk-heavy card where most of the chalk should come through. So let's get right into it. First fight of the night, Michelle Montague coming in at minus 2,000. I believe she is the biggest favorite. The card going up against Morais. Montague 5-0 now. All 5 of those wins coming by rear naked choke, and it seems to be getting easier for her to implement that style. She trains out of American Top Team and is one of the main training partners of Kayla Harrison. She can understand how physical and dominant she can be when she gets her hands around her opponents. She does a great job in terms of initiating the clinch, getting the back of her opponents, dragging them to the ground, and then hopping onto the back to get that rear naked choke position. And I believe she'll be able to do that with relative ease here against Morais. Morais is actually the significant other of former Bellator middleweight champion Rafael Carvalho, and she actually went 3-0 when she started her MMA career back in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, or 2017. Then she took about 4.5 years off, and that's when she had taken 5 years off, and that's where she became a mother, dedicating most of her time to that, and then eventually getting back into the cage. I believe it was earlier this year last year, where she got absolutely pummeled by her opponent for about 7 minutes before her opponent took her to the ground and smashed her from that top position with relative ease. I expect Montague to do the same thing here. I'm considering the chalky under 1.5, considering I would never play minus 2,000, but seeing the under 1.5 around minus 195, minus 200, I feel like Montague should make short work of Morais here. She's going to be way stronger, way better, and way more potent to get that early finish compared to what we've seen in the past from Morais' opponent. So Montague round 1 would be the way I go about it. Next up, Jordan Oliver coming in at minus 900, going up against Braden Akeo coming in at plus 600. Obviously, Oliver, a high-level collegiate wrestling background, made his professional debut, I believe, late last year, if I'm not mistaken, and got his opponent out of there relatively quickly, but they gave him a complete tomato can. Oliver got him to the ground without much issue, although he did get hit a few times before going for the takedown. And then he sunk in the arm triangle choke, although the arm triangle choke was not really completely in. Oliver had the lock from the opposite side of where his body was, but still managed to get the tap from his opponent, letting you know what kind of opponent he was going up against. Akeo actually has some MMA experience. I believe he has a 5-3 MMA record, has been training alongside the MMA lab for the last couple of years, has some decent experience under his belt, but and also comes from a high school wrestling background, but I do not like his lack of urgency at all. Like, he's way too lackadaisical, doesn't provide too much of a threat in the striking realm, a little bit too passive. His wrestling, not all that great either. Even when he gets in on deep takedown attempts, he often is shucked off by his opponents. And then in terms of him getting taken down, very easy to take down and very easy to break from that top position. But that still would not make me want to play a minus 900 on a guy who's only stepping in to his second professional MMA fight. Akeo obviously has the experience advantage here, but I was hoping we would see a little bit more from the tape that I was able to uncover that would make me confident and wanted to take a shot on him at plus 600 just off the experience he has and his training partners. However, I feel like Oliver is just going to be able to control this fight. My big question mark about Oliver is, can he maintain a gas tank for 15 minutes if that's what he needs to do? Obviously, he can submit Akeo here, but if this does get into dragged into deep waters, how confident can you be in a guy who's only in his second professional fight? Oliver should win this, but I want nothing to do with it, so I'm going to pass on it. Next up, one of my favorite PFL prospects. We got Thad Jean coming in at minus 350, going up against Chris Brown, who comes in at plus 285. Now, Thad Jean continues his undefeated run, finished his opponent last time around. I believe that was back in April, where he knocked him out with a beautifully placed and timed uppercut, and he continues to run through most of the division, or at least most of the guys that are being put in front of him. I wish he'd be a little bit more active, but this is his second fight in the span of 4 months, so I'll give him credit for that. He's very nasty from that southpaw position, does a great job in terms of moving with his feet, staying at range, punishing his opponents whenever they enter the pocket. He has nasty power. His defensive grappling has tremendously improved, although we haven't really seen him tested too much in his last fight or two, but still a guy that many people need to keep an eye on, considering he is just 26 years old. His opponent this weekend, Chris Brown. I'm a big fan of this guy, considering he won the LFA title back at LFA 148 as a plus 300 underdog to an undefeated Mexican prospect. Brown utilized his unorthodox striking approach, utilizing a lot of kicks, weird movements, and ultimately landing a beautiful body kick to crumple his opponent. And that's usually his style. He has some wrestling if he needs, but it's often his kicking and his just perpetual movement that causes a lot of opponents issues. It's unfortunate that he has yet to step in the cage since that night, though. That was back in December of 2022. He's had a couple of failed scheduled bouts. And he's 35 years old now. So I think his hopes of making it to the UFC are kind of foregone at this point in time, hence why he's fighting for PFL. He trains out of Jackson Wink, decent all-around fighter, good experience under his belt, but I think that Gene's striking is going to end up being too much for him here. I think mostly Gene continues to counter the kicks of Brown here, and I think that the longer that this fight goes, Gene will be more and more successful with landing his big shots, but you can't overlook the experience advantage that Brown has over Gene in this spot. I do think Brown has a bit of a cardio issue, so that's where Gene could probably take advantage of him late. But I think it's going to be hard for Gene to land cleanly enough on Brown to actually knock him out here, which is why I think that this will be a slow and gradual build of momentum for Gene to eventually land that knockout later on in this matchup, as, again, early going probably be a little bit close considering Brown's movement and kicks, but I do think Gene still ends up getting his hand raised. The line still a little bit too wide for my liking, considering the experience advantage for Brown and just his unorthodox approach to fighting, but I still think that Gene ends up getting his hand raised here. All right, next up, Elvin Espinoza coming in at minus 135, going up against Mads Burnell, who comes in at plus 115. Now, Espinoza is coming off the first loss of his MMA career last time, where he got outworked by Yagshimuradov, and that just, usually whenever a fighter takes their first loss, that's usually a good thing for them in terms of their experience and ability to battle back from that type of loss and showcase that they still belong at this level. Espinoza normally showcases a grapple-heavy approach with a lot of pressure and a high pace, usually putting his opponents to the ground with his wrestling and keeping them on their back. He has a decent striking game, although I think his grappling is probably the best part of his game, especially fueled by the BJJ black belt that he brings to the table. And his cardio, very high level as well. His opponent this weekend, Mads Burnell, picked up a plus 270 underdog upset last time around in the main event against Clay Collard in Collard's hometown. And Burnell showcased his grapple-heavy style and was able to pick up at least 2 of those rounds to end up getting his hand raised. In the striking realm, he doesn't really provide much of a threat. It showcases some decent defense in terms of keeping his hands up so that his opponent's punches usually hit his guard, and then he times takedowns to get his opponents to the ground and then utilizes BJJ black belt. Burnell, I think he's a bit of an underachiever. This guy is, with the skill set that he has, I think he could be a much better fighter, but I think in this matchup, I think he's going to struggle to dictate the pace, which is where Espinoza should be able to have most of his success. I do still think that Burnell is live to pull off the upset considering the experience that he brings to the table and his own BJJ black belt, but I think that Espinoza is just the guy that will set the pace and just kind of dictate how fast the fight takes place, where the fight takes place, and I think he'll actually end up having the wrestling advantage in this matchup as well, which will keep Burnell on the defensive for the most part. So I'm going to go Espinoza here. Not a whole ton of confidence in this spot. You're getting decent odds if you like him at minus 135, but I still think he ends up winning this fight, and I think he wins it on the scorecards. Next up, Danny Sabatello coming in at minus 900, taking on the undefeated and debuting Lazaro Dayron, who comes in at plus 600. Now we know what Sabatello is all about. Although he is 1-3 over his last 4 fights, he ended up losing his rematch to Rafion Stotts last time around in a fight that he was hoping to even the score with his rival. Unfortunately, the same issues that seemed to kind of impact Sabatello's career came back to haunt him once again. He's a great wrestler. He's a great scrambler. He just does not do a good enough job in terms of landing enough damage to make that look more than enough. Then he needs to actually get his hand raised on the scorecards. Against lower levels of competition, he can get away with it because those guys are so wrapped up in trying to get away from his grappling that they kind of forego the damaging aspect of fights and how fights are scored. And I think Sabatello will continue to put those clinics on these fighters that are on the come up before they realize that, hey, I could have won this fight if I just threw a little bit more offense. And I think that's going to be the issue here with Lazaro. Lazaro is a solid fighter, all-around fighter, good striking, good wrestling, but he can be taken advantage of in terms of having a pace set against him. He can be taken down. He can be grinded out. His striking doesn't provide a whole ton of threat in terms of finishing, so I don't think Sabatello has too much to worry about in that aspect. And even the submission game, I don't think Lazaro has enough of a sneaky choke game or good enough scrambles to actually keep Sabatello on the defensive here. So I'm going to go Sabatello by decision, but again, minus 900 for a guy that does not prioritize damage is tough to really get behind, but I do think Sabatello still ends up winning this fight relatively easily. All right, next up, we got Biagio Ali Walsh coming in at minus 1,500, coming into a second professional fight, going up against short notice Brian Stapleton, coming in at plus 850, who makes his professional debut here. Now, Biagio Ali Walsh, last time around, made his debut, I believe it was back in February, and it looked like he chose to treat that fight as a sparring match. He did not go to his striking as often as you would expect him to. He wanted to get in on the takedowns and try to get some time on top of his opponent, seemingly trying to get some cage time and some experience under his belt, and he pretty much had that fight wherever he wanted. It's almost like he let his opponent up at certain points so that he can try to take them down once again. He was not threatened at all in that fight whatsoever, and I think the PFL is going to continue to treat him this way. Just to continue to develop him and try to take advantage of the whole Muhammad Ali relation that he has, and eventually see if he can become a much bigger star as he starts taking steps up in competition. They took the long road with AJ McKee, and it would not surprise me if they try to do the same thing here with Biagio Ali Walsh. What he's best at, striking. He'll always have a physical advantage over most of his opponents early on in his career. He's fast, explosive, powerful, and he always has that striking to lean on if he needs to. His opponent, Brian Stapleton, is a guy that likes to utilize forward pressure, good striking, good movement. He actually started his amateur career 1-3 back in 2016. Took off 4.5 years, came back and ended his amateur career on a 3-1 run. But it's clear that he will come up short against guys similar to the skill level of Ali Walsh. Walsh. I think Walsh will do a good enough job in terms of just landing his big shots. He can mix in the takedowns if he wants and try to make this a sparring match once again. Ali Walsh wins this fight however he wants, and that's kind of my issue in terms of trying to go with the over or under in this matchup, because you don't know if he wants to go out there and just starch his opponent immediately or treat it as another sparring match and try to get some more cage time as well. So I'll go Walsh, but I just don't think this fight is bettable whatsoever. All right, the first of two lightweight playoff matchups here. We got Brent Primus coming in at minus 190, going up against Clay Collard, who comes in at plus 165. Now, Primus is riding a 3-fight winning streak, and most importantly, finished at the top of the division or in the playoffs and got the number 1 seed. He managed to choke out Bruno Miranda in the second round of their fight, and then eventually got a third-round submission over Solomon Renfro last time around. The Renfro fight is a fight that seemed like the momentum was actually shifting in Renfro's favor, but then Primus tapped into his championship medal and eventually started to get the momentum back in his favor, got the takedown, got the back of Renfro, and eventually got the submission. This guy's a high-level BJJ black belt. He's coming close to his 40th birthday, and his striking is more so to set up his takedowns. It's a lot of power shots to either knock down his opponents or parlay that into a level change and get his opponents down. He's very strong with his wrestling. He's a physically intimidating human being considering the stature that he brings to the table, but it's all about getting fights to the ground and trying to submit his opponents. His opponent this weekend, Clay Collard, we know what he's all about. Entertainment, fun fights, and high-volume striking. But unfortunately for him, whenever he goes up against guys that are good enough wrestlers and grapplers, he usually puts on a good performance, defensively speaking, early, but then starts to get lazy with it in the second and third rounds, making poor fight IQ moves like rolling for knee bars or rolling to get out of certain spots and giving up other tough spots. And I think that's the issue he's going to have here against Primus. He could have some good defense early, and his strikes will likely cause Primus some issues, but I think as we start to get into deeper water, Primus will be more and more successful with his grappling, and I think that will allow him to get the position that he needs to potentially get that submission here over Collard. Probably goes to scorecards as well. I also wouldn't count out a Primus early submission, but I think that the huge grappling edge that Primus has here and his passable striking to at least not get knocked out by Collard will allow him to kind of dictate the pace of this fight and then eventually get the submission, or the official prediction, I'll go with Primus by decision, but he should dominate in the grappling realm without too much issue. All right, the second of two lightweight playoffs matchups here. We're going to go with Yagshimuradov coming in at minus 605, going up against Michael Dufort, who comes in at plus 430. Now, Rabadanov won both of his season matchups by decision. It was a hard-fought win over Solomon Renfro, which I believe he was down one round going into the second and third round, and he eventually won those 2 rounds. The Alvin Espinoza fight, he controlled a little bit better, although Espinoza did provide some resistance, but it seemed like Rabadanov was still doing enough to win those matchups. And I think Rabadanov learned a lot from that Peter Bust fight that he had a couple fights back, where it seemed like he completely gashed in the third round, but still managed to survive and still went on the scorecards. I think in that matchup, it was more so the fact that he was trying to chase the finish and try to get a submission, and he was kind of just expending his energy trying to get these submissions. Whereas now in these fights, you're seeing him still be a little bit more efficient with his offense, but being even more efficient in those critical moments so that it looks like he's the one coming out on top in most of these exchanges, whether it's the grappling, whether it's the striking. He has a great all-around game, but I think the best part of his game is his ability to mask his takedowns behind his striking and then get to work from that top position as well. One of the best fighters on the PFL lightweight roster right now, and probably the favorite to win the whole thing. His opponent this weekend, Michael Dufort, pulled off an upset victory over Mads Burnell in his opening regular season bout, but then ended up coming up short against Adam Piccolotti last time around in a fight that went to a split decision. But I thought for sure Piccolotti won rounds 1 and round 3. Dufort, BJJ brown belt, if I'm not mistaken, might be a black belt by this point in time, but he is a guy that normally likes to rely on his grappling to take opponents down and grind them out. His striking is slowly coming along, but that's clearly where opponents can take advantage of him, especially when he starts slowing down a little bit. He throws with a lot of power early on in his matchups, but if he starts getting countered or jabbed, he does start to get demoralized in terms of his own success in the striking realm. I think Rabadanov is the side here. Obviously, minus 605 is just too wide to justify a spot. Dufort is going to be a dog. He's going to fight for, his opportunity to win the spot. When you have $1 million paycheck on the line in your next matchup, you're going to fight as hard as you possibly can. And Dufort definitely has that dog in him. But I think that Rabadanov will still end up being the one winning the more important moments in this matchup. With the slim margins that Rabadanov wins at times, it's kind of hard to justify the minus 600 in him in this spot, but I still think he wins this fight. He's the better overall fighter here, and as long as he doesn't get caught by anything crazy, he should control this fight and end up winning it on the scorecards. All right, next up, Rob Wilkinson coming in at minus 160, going up against Dovletsin Yagshimuradov, who comes in at plus 140. Now, Wilkinson is the 2022 PFL champion, and he was trying to go back-to-back in 2023. Unfortunately, he tested positive for a banned substance and was disqualified for the remainder of the 2023 season. He managed to bounce back in 2024 now, winning both of his regular season bouts. Last time around, going out there and defeating Josh Silveira, but it was a very weird approach that he took in that fight by looking to out-grapple Silveira, something that Silveira normally looks to do against his opponents. It was a closer fight than it should have been. Wilkinson should have been the superior striker there, so I'm not sure why he decided to waste his energy grappling and making it a closer fight than he should have. Wilkinson, nasty Muay Thai specialist, good knees, good elbows, good striking. But when he does, I will be a little bit critical in terms of the level of opponents that he's been beating, and I think the guy that he fights this weekend is probably the best guy he's gone against since coming into the PFL. A guy that's not going to gas out, a guy that can throw as much power in return and possibly find the knockout himself, a guy that can possibly even out grapple Rob Wilkinson, and that's what Yagshimuradov brings to the table. He started his Bellator career 0-2, but now finds himself on a 5-fight winning streak, and in his opening season bout, he made quick work of Jacob Netto, very easy win from there, and then he decided to take a little bit more of a conservative approach against Simon Biong and chose to out-grapple him there, showcasing that he can be successful in almost any aspect of MMA if he goes to it. I think Wilkinson is good. I think he's obviously much better than the 0-2 fighter that he was in the UFC several years ago, but I don't think he's been tested to the point that we see what his true colors are, and I think this weekend we might actually see that. Obviously, Wilkinson probably a better striker here, but I think he's going to struggle with the pressure that Yagshimuradov will put on him, and then eventually the takedowns that Yagshimuradov will be looking to implement here. I do lean Yagshimuradov. I think he is the better fighter, and to get him as the underdog in this spot, I think is a blessing. I think Wilkinson is going to struggle to keep Yagshimuradov off of him. Obviously, Wilkinson could have early success here and finish Yagshimuradov quickly, but if this starts getting into the second and third rounds, that's where Yagshimuradov's experience and just overall MMA game should start to take over. So I'm going to go with the underdog here. The lone underdog that I'm going to be taking on the card is in the co-main event here. So give me Dovletsin Yagshimuradov by decision. All right, main event here, rematch of the 2023 PFL finale. We got Impa Kasanganay coming in at minus 470, going up against Josh Silveira, who comes in at plus 370. Now, the first time these two met, like I said, was in 2023, back in December, I believe it was, maybe November. But that night, we saw Kasanganay clean sweep Silveira on the scorecards. Silveira was trying to get to his wrestling and got nowhere near it. Impa Kasanganay controlled that fight for the most part, landing a couple takedowns of his own, but for the most part, outstriking Silveira, wearing him out, and then eventually winning that fight on the scorecards. Kasanganay is clearly the better fighter here, but we might see a different approach here from Silveira in the fact that we might see him look to take advantage of what Jacob Netto had some success against Kasanganay last time. Kasanganay was on the cusp of losing last time around against Netto, as Netto hurt him multiple times, but then Kasanganay did a good enough job in terms of trying to stay safe, clinching when he needed to, going for takedowns when he needed to, pivoting off when he needed to, but then eventually at the ending of the second round, within the span of a minute, he managed to change the momentum and really start to batter Netto, and eventually got a corner stoppage there after round 2. I wouldn't be surprised to see Silveira completely ditch the wrestle-heavy approach and just try to knock out Kasanganay. He's tried it in the past in terms of going for takedowns and wrestling. Kasanganay did not work out for him at all, so let's ditch it all. Let's just try to put it all on the line, take advantage of maybe some lingering issues that Kasanganay had from that war that he had against Netto just 3 or 4 months ago. Try to put the power on him and try to put him clean out. I still think that Kasanganay will showcase better discipline, better technique, and better fight IQ, which will allow him to stay safe enough and just pick apart Silveira. But a little part of me wants to just sprinkle just a tiny bit on Josh Silveira by knockout at plus 1,000. I think that's a tremendous line, trying to fade Kasanganay's durability after being damaged as much as he was just back in April. Silveira, decent power, not a crazy knockout puncher, but if he just bites down on the mouthpiece and accepts the fact that his normal way of fighting is not going to work this time, maybe that produces a knockout for him. But official prediction will be Kasanganay by decision. I'm going to pass on his minus 470 line here. I think he wins, but I might sprinkle a little bit of Silveira knockout just for kicks. There you guys go. PFL breakdowns for you guys. Later on today, I'll have my quick picks version of the UFC 305 breakdown. So if you guys want to check that out, come back to the YouTube page later this evening. I'll have my free parlay for UFC 305 and my 3 best prop bets dropping on Friday. So stay tuned for that. And then lastly, if you want your ACA full card breakdown, I'll have it in written form on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. That card goes down Friday morning as an appetizer to the PFL and UFC cards this weekend. Again, check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page if you want access to that. Otherwise, I will see you guys later today for the quick picks. Peace.
Last thing.